2,000 miles of untamed wilderness. Between the 1840s and 1860s, nearly 400,000 people packed up their lives and attempted to walk across the North American continent. Statistically, 1 in 10 of them never made it. Because these wagon trains were fighting a ticking clock and couldn't afford to stop, the route itself became a continuous, unmarked graveyard. Victims were buried directly on the path, and the remaining wagons deliberately rolled over the freshly turned dirt to pack it down and hide the scent from scavenging wolves. Which raises a rather obvious question. Why would hundreds of thousands of people willingly subject their families to a grueling 6-month march with such incredibly high odds of dying? This migration was a calculated, desperate flight from ruin. Families packed their lives into small wooden boxes because overwhelming historical forces left them with very few other options for survival. In the late 1830s, the United States suffered a catastrophic economic collapse. Entire communities in the East faced foreclosure, mounting debts, and rampant disease in overcrowded cities. People were losing their farms and had nowhere left to turn. Right at the height of this desperation, rumors started filtering back from the West. They heard about a lush paradise called the Willamette Valley in Oregon. The soil was supposedly rich, the weather was mild year-round, and most importantly, the U.S. government was giving away massive plots of land for free. This 19th century painting captures the spirit of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were divinely ordained to settle the continent from coast to coast. You can see an angelic figure driving out the darkness and guiding the settlers westward. Total financial ruin back home, paired with the promise of free land and a divine mandate to take it, created an irresistible historical gravity. For many, the choice was either slow decline in the East or a chance at a new life on the trail. This is a classic prairie schooner. It is essentially a small wooden box on wheels covered in a thin canvas tarp. Families would spend their entire life savings just to outfit one of these fragile wagons for the journey. Notice the heavy wooden yokes on these animals. Pioneers overwhelmingly chose oxen over horses to pull their supplies. While slow, oxen possessed the brute strength needed, could survive by eating tough prairie grass, and were less likely to be stolen. But surviving required a brutal learning curve. Early pioneers packed as if they were simply moving to a new neighborhood, bringing heavy wooden furniture, cast iron stoves, and family heirlooms. Within 2 weeks, the trail was littered with abandoned pianos and heavy dressers, left by people who realized a lighter wagon was their only hope. This timeline illustrates the narrow logistical window they operated in. Pioneers had to leave Missouri in late May. Leave too early and the prairie grass wouldn't be tall enough for the oxen to eat. Leave too late and they would get trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains by deadly winter blizzards. They had roughly 5 months to walk 2,000 miles. That meant covering a mandatory 15 miles every single day. Before a single drop of rain fell, these families were locked in a ruthless race against time and physics. Native American tribes were frequently vital partners for the wagon trains. They acted as river guides, operated ferries, and traded fresh horses for tools and clothing. The primary killer on the trail was entirely invisible. It was cholera, a brutal waterborne disease. Look at this map. Hundreds of thousands of people and their livestock were funneled along this exact same geographic corridor, relying on the same limited water sources. With no sanitation, these essential rivers became biological choke points. A healthy pioneer could take a single drink from a contaminated stream, experience violent fluid loss, and die of extreme dehydration before sunset. Unbridged waterways like this one forced pioneers to make impossible choices. They would seal their wooden wagons with tar and attempt to float them across freezing, fast-moving currents. Wagons routinely capsized in the chaos, drowning the families trapped inside and dragging panicked oxen to the bottom. The daily reality of the trail was a relentless gauntlet of microscopic pathogens and freezing, violent rivers that could erase a family in seconds. By the time the survivors reached the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, they were severely depleted. Food supplies were heavily rationed, shoes had worn through, and wagons were practically shaking apart. Here, the landscape turned vertical. Families had to unload their wagons and carry hundreds of pounds of supplies up steep mountain passes, using rudimentary ropes and pulleys to hoist the empty wooden boxes over massive boulders. Any delay invited catastrophic consequences. The Donner Party of 1846 attempted an unproven shortcut and failed to beat the trail's ticking clock. These exact mountain passes became a frozen prison. Trapped under snowdrifts 20 feet deep, the stranded pioneers ate their pack animals, then their leather shoes. When nothing was left, survivors resorted to eating the bodies of the dead. The mountains forced ordinary families to the absolute limit of human desperation, where survival sometimes required sacrificing humanity itself. You can see the toll of that journey in this photograph. For the lucky ones who reached the lush valleys, arrival was a somber victory. They were starving, dressed in rags, and carrying the trauma of the loved ones they buried along the way. Notice the steam locomotive pulling up right alongside these wagons. This massive era of human foot traffic abruptly came to a halt in 1869 with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. In an instant, the 6-month struggle for survival against disease, rivers, and starvation was replaced by a relatively comfortable 7-day train ride. A single lonely pioneer grave sits directly beside the steel of the modern railroad tracks. The borders of the American map were defined by this level of suffering, drawn across a landscape of thousands of unmarked graves left behind by these families.